The first thing that hits you after 12 years, 4 months, and 16 days isn't the sunlight, it's the sound. Inside, sound is a contained thing. It's the metallic slam of a door, a voice echoing off concrete, the predictable scrape of a food tray. It's a world of hard surfaces and known quantities. Out here, out here, the sound is a living, breathing monster. It's a chaotic symphony of everything I'd forgotten. The gate clanged shut behind me, a sound I'd dreamed of for over a decade. But it was instantly swallowed by the whoosh of a car going too fast on the wet road, the distant, impatient blare of a horn, the chattering of birds that sounded frantic, not peaceful. Each noise was a shard of glass against my nerves. I stood there on the curb, a man made of parchment, feeling like I might tear apart in the wind of this new, loud world. The air itself had a weight to it, thick with the smell of rain on hot asphalt, exhaust fumes, and the faint, sweet scent of blooming something from a nearby yard. It was overwhelming. My lungs, used to the sterile, recycled air of a facility that smelled of bleach and despair, didn't know what to do with it. I took a shallow, ragged breath. In my right hand, I clutched the only possession that mattered. A single, worn envelope, the paper soft and frayed at the edges from thousands of touches in the dark. Mateo's last letter, the one he mailed to me the day before he died. I never opened it. For 12 years, it was a holy relic, a piece of him I was saving for this moment, for when I was truly free. It was my anchor, the one solid thing in a universe that was now tilting and spinning violently. A corrections officer, not a guard. Their corrections officers, you learn that distinction fast, had given me a cheap plastic bag with the clothes I was arrested in. Jeans that were now a relic from a different era. A band t-shirt that felt like a costume from someone else's life. They were too big. My body, once filled out from lifting weights and a young man's metabolism, was now just angles and hard lines, a scaffold of survival. I saw a beat-up sedan pull into the lot, and a woman with fierce, kind eyes got out. Elena, the journalism student who had become my lifeline to the truth. She smiled, a little hesitant, and raised a hand in a wave. I tried to smile back, but my facial muscles felt frozen, unfamiliar with the gesture. A real smile? That was a currency I hadn't spent in a long, long time. My mind flashed back to the final walkout, the last set of electronically buzzing doors. The other men in the block, their voices a chorus of growled well-wishes and jealous curses. "Don't come back, Leo. Live it for the rest of us, man." Their voices were a part of me now, etched into my bones. They were the ghosts I was leaving behind in that concrete tomb, and I was becoming a ghost out here. Elena reached me. "Leo, you okay?" The question was so vast, so impossible, I just stared at her. Okay? I was a fossil that had been dug up and asked to appreciate the beauty of a sunset. My entire being was calibrated for survival, for reading the micro-expressions of dangerous men, for finding the threat in every shadow. How do you turn that off? The sounds, I finally managed, my voice a dry, rusted hinge. I forgot how loud it all is. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Let's get you to the halfway house. You can get your bearings there." The halfway house. Another institution, another set of rules. But the doors wouldn't lock from the outside. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. As I slid into the passenger seat of her car, the smell of old coffee and fake pine air freshener, another assault on my senses. I looked down at the letter in my hand. The unopened letter. This was the promise. This was the reason I'd fought so hard, why I'd endured the beatings, the solitary confinement, the endless, soul-crushing monotony. It wasn't just for freedom. It was for this moment, the moment I could finally read his last words to me, in a place where I could breathe, where I could feel them without the prison walls distorting their meaning. But now that I was here, the fear was paralyzing. What if his last words were angry? What if he knew something was wrong, and I was too blind, too self-absorbed to see it? What if the last piece of my best friend, the man whose death I was convicted of, shattered the fragile hope I'd built my entire appeal on? Elena pulled out onto the road, and the world outside the window was a blur of color and motion. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird in a cage that had just been opened, too scared to fly. I was free. I was out. But as the prison disappeared from the rearview mirror, I realized the biggest prison wasn't made of concrete and steel. It was the one I carried with me, built from memory, loss, and a single, unopened envelope. I was a ghost in my own life, and I had no idea how to become real again. The memory of that night doesn't feel like a memory. It feels like a film reel I'm forced to watch, frame by brutal frame, every time I close my eyes. It was the pinnacle of everything we'd worked for. Matteo's first solo show. The gallery was called Vertigo. All white walls and polished concrete, and it was packed with the glittering, hollow people of the art world. The air smelled of expensive perfume, champagne, and the intoxicating, pine-scented aroma of his paintings. They were magnificent, wild, emotional landscapes that felt like looking directly into his soul. I remember the pride swelling in my chest, so big I thought it might crack my ribs. This was us, two kids from the wrong side of the tracks, who used to steal spray paint and tag freight trains, now here. He was the genius. I was his manager, his brother, his protector. We were a perfect, self-contained universe. And then he entered the frame. Damien Cross. He moved through the crowd like a shark, smooth and silent, his suit costing more than our first car. He had a predator's smile, all teeth and no warmth. He zeroed in on Matteo, clasping his shoulder with a hand that looked more like a talon. "Matteo," he purred, his voice like oil. "Transcendent work, truly. Echoes of a silent city. I haven't seen a composition like this well, since the forgeries I had authenticated last spring." He gave a conspiratorial wink. Sometimes the market needs a good story more than it needs the truth. Eh? I saw Matteo's smile tighten. He was an artist, pure and true. The business side, the dirty games, that was my department. I stepped in, my own smile plastered on. "Mr. Cross, Leo. The stories we tell are always true to the artist's vision," I said, my voice steady. But a cold dread was already coiling in my gut. Cross turned his gaze on me, and it was like being looked at by something not quite human. "Vision is cheap, boy. Provenance is priceless. And I decide the provenance." He leaned in, his champagne breath hot against my ear. "Your friend here has a bright future. Or a very dark one. It depends on who his friends are." The threat was veiled, but it was there. He wanted Matteo. He wanted to own him, to control his output, to maybe even use his talent for his own forgeries. We'd heard the whispers. Matteo could replicate anyone. It was a party trick, a way to learn from the masters. But in the hands of a man like Cross, it was a weapon. Later, after the crowd thinned, we were in the back office, counting the little red, sold dots on the floor plan. We were giddy, drunk on success, and cheap champagne we'd snuck from the bar. "Did you see his face when you said that, Leo?" Matteo laughed, clapping me on the back. "He looked like he swallowed a lemon. We don't need him. We did it. We actually did it. We did, man. We did." The world was limitless. The argument happened an hour later. Cross cornered us as we were leaving, his smugness gone, replaced by a cold, hard fury. "You think this is a game?" he hissed, shoving a contract into Matteo's chest. "You sign with me, tonight or I will make sure you never sell so much as a finger painting in this town again. I will bury you. That's when I lost it. All the pent-up anger from a lifetime of being looked down on, of fighting for every scrap, boiled over. I got in his face. Get out of here, Cross. He's not signing anything. We know what you are. We know about the forgeries. You touch him, and I'll go to the press. I'll go to the police. The moment the words left my mouth, I knew it was a mistake. You don't threaten a man like Damien Cross. You just don't. His eyes went dead, flat. He didn't look at me with anger, but with a kind of clinical disgust, like I was an insect he was about to pin to a board. You have no idea what you're playing with, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Then he turned and walked away. That was the last time I saw him. The last time I saw the world as a place with any semblance of justice. The rest of the night is a blur of adrenaline and rage. We went back to Mateo's studio, a chaotic, beautiful space above a closed-down auto shop. We were still arguing, not at each other, but at the world, at the system, at Cross. We should just leave, man, Mateo said, his voice thick with fear and drink. Take the money from the show and just go. Mexico, somewhere he can't find us. And let him win, I shot back. No, we fight. We expose him. We were two sides of the same coin. His was flight, mine was fight. It got heated, stupid, drunk, scared heat. I finally stormed out, slamming the rickety studio door so hard the glass pane rattled. I'm going for a walk to cool off, I yelled. Don't do anything stupid. Those were the last words I ever said to him. I walked for maybe an hour, my anger slowly cooling into a dull, heavy shame. I shouldn't have left him like that, not when he was so scared. I turned back, my steps quickening with a new, unnamed dread. I didn't need a key. The studio door was slightly ajar. The first thing I noticed was the silence. It was a thick, wrong silence. Then, the smell. Metallic. Copper. A smell I would come to know intimately in the years that followed. I pushed the door open. He was on the floor, lying in a pool of crimson that spread out from under him like a dark, terrible halo. His favorite paintbrush, the one with the chewed-up blue handle, was clutched in his hand. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, at a painting he would never finish. I screamed his name. I fell to my knees, my hands hovering over him, not knowing what to do, getting his blood on my clothes, my skin. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers slipping on the screen, dialing 911. I was sobbing, begging him to hold on. I never heard the sirens. The next thing I knew, I was being ripped away from him, my arms wrenched behind my back. I found him. I found him like this, I kept screaming. The police officer, his face a mask of cold professionalism, held up an evidence bag. Inside was a knife from Mateo's kitchen block, its handle clean, its blade dark. My fingerprints were all over that knife. We'd used it to cut a pizza hours earlier. Then came the witness, a woman from the bakery across the street who conveniently couldn't sleep and heard a violent argument. She saw a man of my description, in my clothes, storm out and then return later. She heard shouting, then silence. The trap was perfect. My fingerprints, my motive, a witnessed public argument, my opportunity. The frame was so airtight, so meticulously constructed, that by the time they read me my rights, I knew. I was already guilty. Damien Cross hadn't just killed Mateo. He had killed me too. He just let the state do the paperwork. They call it a box, not a cell. A box. Because that's what it is. 10 feet by 8. A concrete tomb with a steel door that screams shut, a sound that never, ever stops feeling like a punch to the gut. The first few months. You're not a person. You're a raw, open nerve. Every sound is a threat. Every shadow holds a knife. You learn the hierarchy fast. The predators, the prey, and the ghosts, like me, who are just there, waiting to be erased. The grief for Matteo was a physical thing, a constant, suffocating weight on my chest. But it was quickly joined by a sharper, more corrosive emotion, rage, a pure, white-hot hatred for Damien Cross that was the only thing keeping me warm in the perpetual chill of this place. I'd lie on my thin cot, staring at the water-stained ceiling, and play the fantasy over and over in my head. The fantasy of getting out, of finding him, of making him pay. It was my lullaby, my prayer. But fantasies don't fill the 23 hours a day in the box. Reality does. Reality is the taste of stale bread and lukewarm slop they call food. Reality is the constant, low-grade hum of fear. Reality is the sound of a man being broken in the shower, and you learning to turn up the noise in your own head just to survive. I was assigned to the library, a joke of a name for a room with 3 half-empty shelves of donated paperbacks, most of them water-damaged romances or thrillers. But it was a job. It got me out of my cell. And it's where I met Arthur. Arthur was the prison librarian, a man in his late 60s with a face like a crumpled road map and eyes that had seen too much. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, like every movement cost him something. He was a ghost, too, but an old one who had made peace with his haunt. He didn't talk much. He'd just grunt and point me towards a stack of books that needed sorting. For weeks, we worked in silence. Then, one day, I was sorting through a donation box and found a book on contract law. It was dense, impenetrable. I slammed it shut in frustration, a guttural sound of pure despair tearing from my throat. "The law won't help you in here, son," Arthur said, his voice a dry rasp. He didn't even look up from his desk. "It's not for in here," I muttered, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand, angry at the show of weakness. "It's for out there. I'm innocent." A bitter, short laugh escaped him. It was a sound like gravel shifting. "They're all innocent in here, especially the guilty ones." "I was framed," I insisted, my voice trembling with a passion I hadn't felt in months. "By a powerful man, Damien Cross. He killed my best friend, and he set me up." I expected more cynicism. Instead, Arthur went very still. He finally looked up, and his eyes, those tired ancient eyes, focused on me with a new sharp intensity. "Cross? The art collector?" My heart stuttered. You know him?" He leaned back in his creaky chair, the ghost of a smile on his lips. "I was a lawyer once, a good one, until I took on a client who was stepping on the toes of some of Mr. Cross's associates. Let's just say I lost the case, and my license, and a few other things I held dear." He tapped a finger on the desk. "So, you're the one, the artist's friend." That was the moment my life in the box split in two. The before and the after. Arthur became my mentor, my Yoda in this hellscape. He was the one who told me about the Innocence Project, and we started the long, soul-crushing process of writing letters, of filling out forms, of telling my story to 1,000 different, faceless organizations, only to be met with silence or polite, devastating rejections. "The evidence is too clean, Leo," he'd say, poring over the trial transcripts I'd managed to get. "Your prints on the knife. The witness. It's a perfect narrative." The justice system loves a perfect narrative. It hates messy truths. But Arthur taught me how to be messy. He taught me how to think like a lawyer, how to deconstruct the case against me. We spent hours in that dusty library, the air thick with the smell of old paper and despair, picking apart every sentence of testimony, every piece of evidence logged. They had a motive for you, he'd muse, stroking his chin. The argument. But what was Cross's motive? The real one. Not just a business dispute. What was so big that Matteo had to die for it? It was during one of these sessions, about 3 years in, that I found it. A tiny, overlooked detail in the evidence log. Item 174B. Security tape. Gus's Gas and Go. 11:05 p.m. 11:35 p.m. Contents. Unrelated traffic. Logged but not entered into evidence. Gus's Gas and Go. It was directly across the street from Matteo's studio. Its camera, I knew, was pointed right at the studio's entrance. The prosecution had logged it, but dismissed it as unrelated. Why? Because their timeline, their perfect narrative, didn't require it. They had me returning later. What if this tape showed something else? Someone else? It was a thread. A single, fragile thread in the tapestry of lies that had caged me. But it was the first one I'd ever found. I clutched that transcript, my hands shaking. Arthur looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something other than weary resignation in his eyes. I saw a flicker, a spark. That, he said quietly, is a crack in the wall. Now we just have to find a way to hammer it open from in here. The box didn't feel so small in that moment. For the first time, a sliver of light had pierced the concrete. The fight was no longer a fantasy. It had begun. A crack in the wall. Arthur's words became a mantra, a prayer I repeated in the dark, my breath making ghosts in the air of my cell. But a crack is useless if you don't have a tool to widen it. And we were in a place designed to ensure you have no tools. The first, most impossible hurdle was the tape itself. It was from a decade ago. Gus's Gas and Go had long since been bought out by a corporate chain. The original owner, Gus, was probably dead or retired to Florida. The chances of that specific tape still existing were astronomically small. It was a digital ghost, and we were trying to summon it from a concrete tomb. This is where the world outside, the world I could only imagine through the static of a bad phone connection, had to come into play. My family had abandoned me after the verdict. The shame was too great, the evidence too damning. But Arthur, the disgraced lawyer, he had one remaining thread to the outside world. A former colleague, now a law professor, who felt guilty for what had happened to him. A man who owed him a favor. It was a dangerous game. Communicating with the outside for anything other than sanctioned calls was a major violation. Getting caught could mean losing my library job, solitary confinement, and setting back any potential appeal by years. We had to be ghosts. Arthur's contact, Professor Evans, was sympathetic but skeptical. Arthur, it's a gas station tape from 12 years ago that wasn't even entered into evidence. It's a dead end. But Arthur, in his dry, relentless way, wore him down. The prosecution dismissed it because it didn't fit their timeline. That doesn't mean it's irrelevant. It means it's inconvenient. Find the inconvenience, David. Meanwhile, a new name entered my world. Elena. Professor Evans had a sharp, fiercely idealistic journalism student working as his research assistant. He gave her the task as a long-shot exercise, a lesson in investigative dead ends. But Elena didn't see a dead end. She saw a story. Our first communication was a letter, vetted by the prison, bland on the surface. She was a pen pal, interested in rehabilitation. But between the lines, in a code Arthur and I had devised using page numbers, line numbers, and word counts from a donated dictionary, was a different message. Found corporate parent. Digging into their archives. Don't hope. But try. Don't hope. It was the most dangerous thing she could have said. Because I started to hope. That fragile spark Arthur had ignited became a flickering flame. I started eating all my food. I started doing push-ups in my cell, not just to survive, but to get strong. For the first time, I was preparing for a future. Months passed, the crushing weight of institutional time. Then, a breakthrough, delivered in another coded letter. Elena had hit a wall with the corporate chain, but she'd used a student loan refund to take a bus to a neighboring state, tracking down the original owner, Gus. He was alive, a grumpy old man living in a trailer park, but he remembered the case, and he remembered the cops taking the tape. He'd kept a personal copy on an old hard drive, a relic in a box in his closet, because you can't trust the government. He gave her a copy. She had it. The next part was the most dangerous. We needed to get the tape into me. A smuggled cell phone. The ultimate contraband. It was arranged through a guy in the kitchen, a lifer, who Arthur had once helped with a commutation letter. The price was my commissary fund for 6 months and a favor to be named later. A favor in prison is a terrifying currency, but I would have sold my soul. The phone was a cheap, ancient brick, smuggled in inside a bag of rice to hide it from the metal detectors. It felt alien in my hand, a relic from a past life. My heart hammered against my ribs as I waited for the designated time, hidden in the bottom of a laundry cart in a disused supply closet. The phone buzzed, a vibration that felt as loud as a bomb in the silence. An unknown number. I answered, my voice a whisper. "Leo!" It was a young woman's voice, tight with nerves. "Elena. Yeah. I'm emailing you the file. It's a clip. It's... just watch it." Using the phone's painfully slow data connection, I opened the email. There was a video file. I pressed play. The quality was grainy, black and white. The timestamp in the corner glowed. 11:28 p.m., the night of the murder. The view was from across the street, looking directly at the heavy, industrial door to Matteo's studio. I saw a figure, me, in my jacket, storm out and walk away down the street, my posture rigid with anger. My heart ached watching my younger self, so oblivious to the hell that was waiting. Then, for 20 minutes, nothing. Just the occasional car passing. Then at 11:52 p.m. another figure approached. A big man, bulky in a hooded sweatshirt, his face obscured. He moved with a purposeful, athletic grace. He didn't break in, he used a key. He slipped inside. The time code ticked by. 11:54, 11:55, 11:56. At 11:57 p.m., the door flew open and the man rushed out. He was moving faster now. Agitated, in his hand, wrapped in a cloth, was a long, straight object. Even through the grainy footage, I knew. It was the knife from Matteo's block. He jogged to a waiting car, a dark sedan with no license plate visible, and sped off. I stopped breathing. The world narrowed to that grainy screen. This was it. The proof. The man who actually did it. But it was the final clip that sealed it. Elena had fast-forwarded. 12:15 a.m., the figure of me returning. My walk slower now, my head down. I approached the door, found it ajar, and went in. A few minutes later, my frantic form reappeared, stumbling into the street, screaming for help that was already too late. I had to stuff my fist in my mouth to keep from sobbing. The relief was so violent it was physical. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't a murderer. The tape proved I wasn't inside when Matteo was killed. It proved someone else was. It proved the prosecution's timeline was a lie. "Leo!" Elena's voice was small in my ear. "Are you there?" "I'm here," I choked out. "He used a key. I know. He worked for Cross. His name is Marcus Thorne, former MMA fighter. Now, he's Cross's personal security consultant. This is the key, Leo. This is the crack." I ended the call, destroyed the SIM card, and passed the phone back through the network. I sat in the dark of that closet, the smell of bleach and mold in my nostrils, and I wept silent, heaving tears. For the first time in over a decade, they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of fury, of vindication. We had the key. Now, we just had to turn the lock. The light outside was different this time. It wasn't just bright, it was accusatory. I was out on a technicality, a procedural miracle Arthur had engineered based on the prosecution's failure to disclose the existence of the gas station tape. It wasn't an exoneration. It was a loophole, a temporary stay of execution. I was free, but I was still the man who had killed Matteo in the eyes of the world, and Damien Cross was still a pillar of the community, untouched, unaccused. My new home was a halfway house that smelled of stale cigarettes and lost potential. The rules were a joke compared to prison, but the stigma was a new kind of cage. I saw it in the eyes of the other residents, a mix of curiosity and fear. I saw it in the way the clerk at the corner store watched my hands, as if I might steal something. I was a ghost, but now people could see right through me, and they didn't like what they saw. Elena became my war general. We set up our command center in the back booth of a 24-hour diner, surrounded by the smell of greasy fries and endless coffee. Our weapons were her laptop, a cheap burner phone, and a righteous fury that burned hotter than the kitchen grill. "The system won't save you, Leo," she said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "The DA's office is dragging its feet. Cross has donors on the oversight committee. We have to try him in the court of public opinion." So we built our case in the light. Elena used her journalism skills to create an anonymous blog, The Cross Examination. We started drip-feeding the story, not all at once, but in pieces. First, a post about the flawed evidence in my case. Then, a deep dive into the mysterious, unlogged gas station tape. We didn't name Cross yet. We just laid the groundwork, creating a narrative of a corrupt investigation. The response was a slow, simmering hum. True crime forums picked it up. A few local reporters, friends of Elena's from college, started asking quiet questions. We were poking a beehive with a very long, very careful stick. Then, we released the clip. Not the whole tape, but a 10-second segment. The timestamp, the hooded figure, Marcus Thorne, entering Matteo's studio with a key. The caption was simple. "This man is not Leo. Who is he? And who gave him the key?" The hum became a roar. The video went micro-viral. Comments flooded in. People did what people do online. They enhanced, they analyzed, they investigated. Within 48 hours, Marcus Thorne's name was all over social media, linked to his MMA record, to his known associates. This is when the battle began in earnest. Cross didn't fight with lawsuits. He fought with shadows. I started getting hang-up calls on the burner phone. One morning, I found the tires on Elena's beat-up sedan slashed. A note was tucked under the wiper, written in a neat block print. "Stop digging in graves. You might fall in." The intimidation was supposed to paralyze us. It did the opposite. It was an admission of guilt. We were on the right track. Elena, brilliant and fearless, started a podcast. She interviewed me, her voice gentle but persistent, walking me through that night, through the trial, through the discovery of the tape. Hearing my own voice, telling my story to the void, was a surreal and cathartic experience. I wasn't just Leo the inmate anymore. I was a person. Listeners heard the pain, the confusion, the 12 years of my life, stolen. The podcast downloads skyrocketed. Cross's next move was a smear campaign. A source close to the investigation suddenly started talking to the mainstream press, spinning a new, salacious tale. Maybe Leo and Matteo were lovers. It was a crime of passion. The tape? It could have been doctored. I was a manipulative, cunning killer trying to exploit the system. It was a classic tactic. Muddy the waters, make the truth just one of many competing narratives. For a few terrifying days, it worked. The comments on our blog turned ugly. Doubt began to creep in. We were losing the narrative. We needed the kill shot. We needed to connect Thorne directly to Cross, and we needed to prove Cross's motive. The why was the final missing piece. Why would a powerful man like Cross risk everything to destroy a struggling artist? I spent a day in a fugue state, pacing the tiny, confining yard of the halfway house. The answer had to be with Matteo. It was always with Matteo. I thought of his studio, that chaotic, sacred space. The police had sealed it after the murder, and his family, in their grief, had left it untouched. It was a tomb within a tomb. I turned to Elena, a desperate idea forming. The studio, we have to get inside. It was the biggest risk we'd taken yet. Breaking the seal on a crime scene was a felony. It could send me back to prison for good, nullifying my release. But we were out of options. The public's attention span was short. Cross was winning the war of attrition. We waited for a night of torrential rain, the kind that washes away sins and witnesses. The lock on the old studio door was rusted and gave way with a single, sharp crack from a crowbar. The sound echoed in the empty street, but the rain swallowed it whole. Stepping inside was like stepping into a ghost. A thick layer of dust covered everything, frozen in time. Matteo's last half-finished painting still stood on the easel, a cityscape bleeding into an abstract scream of color. It smelled of turpentine, dust, and decay. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. We didn't have much time. We searched desperately, our flashlight beams cutting through the oppressive darkness. We overturned drawers, looked behind canvases, our hands becoming black with grime. We found nothing. Hope began to curdle into a familiar, acidic despair. This was it, our last desperate gamble, and we had lost. And then, as I leaned against his old drafting table, my head in my hands, I noticed it. The edge of the large central canvas on the easel was slightly warped. I ran my fingers along it. It wasn't glued down properly. With a careful, trembling pull, I peeled the canvas back from its wooden stretcher, and there, tucked into the hollow frame, was a small, black, moleskin notebook, Matteo's secret journal. The world stopped. The only sound was the drumming of rain on the corrugated metal roof, a frantic heartbeat matching my own. The moleskin notebook felt impossibly heavy in my hands, a sacred, terrible object. This was him. This was Matteo's voice, preserved in this dusty tomb, waiting for me. Elena shone her flashlight over my shoulder, her breath held. "Leo," she whispered, her voice full of awe and dread. I didn't open it at first. I just held it, feeling the texture of the leather, imagining his hands, stained with paint and ambition, holding this very book. This was the final door, and I was terrified of what was on the other side. Finally, with grimy, trembling fingers, I opened it. The first pages were sketches, ideas for paintings, fragments of poetry. Then the entries began to change. The tone darkened. About 6 months before he died, the name Cross started appearing. Cross is a vulture. He doesn't see art. He sees assets. He keeps talking about market corrections and creating value. He asked me if I could recreate the brushwork of a recently deceased painter. I told him no. The look he gave me? It was cold. Final. My heart ached. I kept reading, the beam of the flashlight shaking in my grip. We're in trouble, Leo and I. The rent, the show costs. It's bleeding us dry. I did a stupid thing, a desperate thing. Cross offered me a commission, $5,000, cash, to restore a minor painting. It was a forgery. I knew it the second I saw it, but I took the money. I was so ashamed. I told Leo it was an advance from a gallery. I signed my name into a contract with the devil. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. He'd kept this from me. He'd shouldered this alone. The entries became more frantic. Cross owns me now. He has the forgery, with my restoration work on it as authentication. He says if I don't continue to work for him, he'll expose me, destroy my career before it even begins. He wants me to forge a whole series, attribute them to a dead artist, and he'll discover them. He says my talent is a waste on original work. I could feel his terror bleeding through the page, the ink itself seeming to pulse with panic. Then the final entry, dated the day before he died. I can't do this. I can't live like this. I'm going to the Art Authentication Board tomorrow. I'm going to tell them everything. I have copies of the emails, the transfer receipts. I'm going to expose Damien Cross for the fraud he is. I know it's dangerous. I know what he's capable of. But I can't be his ghost painter. If you're reading this, Leo, I'm gone. And I am so sorry. I used your name to secure that first loan from Cross when we were desperate. I never told you. I painted you into this trap. Forgive me. Live for both of us. The journal slipped from my numb fingers and hit the dusty floor with a soft thud. The air rushed from my lungs. I staggered back, collapsing into Mateo's ragged armchair. It wasn't just a murder, it was a silencing. Mateo wasn't killed because of a simple argument. He was killed because he was going to blow the whistle on a massive art forgery scheme that would have ruined Cross. My best friend had been executed to protect a corrupt man's fortune and reputation. And the final, devastating blow. The trap I'd spent 12 years fighting my way out of. Mateo had, however, unintentionally, helped to set it. He'd used my name. That was the hook Cross needed to build his perfect frame. It gave me a connection, a paper trail, a reason to be the fall guy. The emotion that washed over me wasn't anger at him. It was a grief so profound, so complex, it felt like my soul was being torn in two. He'd been carrying this immense guilt, this terror, all alone. He died trying to make it right. He died because of his conscience. Elena picked up the journal, her eyes scanning the last page. She looked at me, her face pale. "Oh, Leo," she breathed. I looked around the studio, at the ghost of our shared dream. The ambition, the laughter, the art. It had all been poisoned by Cross, but it had also been compromised by our own desperation. We were just two kids from the wrong side of the tracks, and the system was built to crush people like us. He was going to be a hero, I said, my voice hollow. And they made him look like a victim of a squabble. They made me look like a monster. Elena knelt in front of me, her hands on my knees. Her eyes were fierce. "This is it, Leo. This is the why. This is the motive. This journal plus the tape. It's over for Cross. We have him." We had the final piece, the whisper from the grave that would become a roar in the courtroom. But as I sat there, surrounded by the ghosts of what was and what could have been, the victory felt ashes in my mouth. The truth, it turned out, was even more painful than the lie. The courtroom felt smaller this time. Or maybe I was bigger. For 12 years, I had been a passive object in this system, the accused, the convicted, the inmate. Today, I was an active participant. I was the accuser. The air was thick with the smell of old wood, lemon polish, and the sharp, metallic tang of tension. Damien Cross sat at the defense table, impeccably dressed, a faint, condescending smile playing on his lips. He looked like a man attending a mildly inconvenient business meeting. Marcus Thorne, his hulking shadow, sat beside him, his face a stony mask. They were still trying to project an aura of untouchable power. But the atmosphere in the room was different. The public gallery was packed. Supporters from the online campaign, journalists, curious citizens. Their presence was a palpable force. Elena sat in the front row, her notebook ready, her gaze steady and reassuring. We had turned this from a legal proceeding into a spectacle, and now we had to win the show. My new lawyer, a fiery litigator named Sarah Jenkins, who had taken the case pro bono after hearing the podcast, stood to make her opening. She didn't talk about legal technicalities. She told a story of two friends, of a predatory wolf in a suit, of a conspiracy to silence the truth. She held up Matteo's journal. This, she said, her voice ringing through the room, is the ghost's testimony. The prosecution, representing the state that had so thoroughly failed the first time, was defensive, trying to paint me as a manipulative liar. They presented their old, perfect narrative, but the foundation was cracked, and we had the sledgehammer. When it was my turn to take the stand, a strange calm settled over me. This was it. The moment I had fought for, bled for, survived for. I wasn't just answering questions. I was telling my story, our story, to the people who had the power to make it official. Sarah led me through it all. The night of the show, the threat from Cross, the argument, the walk, the discovery of Matteo's body. I spoke of the blood, the sound of my own screams, the cold certainty of the trap closing around me. I described the box, the despair, and the fragile hope Arthur had given me. Then she presented the gas station tape. On a large screen for the jury to see, the grainy figures moved. Me storming out. The wait. Then Marcus Thorne, entering with a key. The jury leaned forward, their eyes fixed on the screen. You could see the narrative they'd been told start to crumble. But the climax was the journal. Sarah had me read Matteo's final entry aloud. My voice shook, but I didn't let it break. If you're reading this, Leo, I'm gone. And I am so sorry. I used your name. I painted you into this trap. Forgive me. Live for both of us. A collective, sharp intake of breath filled the room. I looked directly at Cross. For the first time, the smug mask slipped. A vein throbbed in his temple. He was seeing his carefully constructed world of lies and money catch fire. The prosecution's case was in shambles. They tried to attack the journal's authenticity, but the forensics confirmed it was Matteo's, the ink dating correct. They were flailing. Then Sarah called her final witness, Marcus Thorne. He was a broken man. The pressure from the public exposure, the knowledge that he was the fall guy, had eroded his loyalty. After being sworn in, under Sarah's relentless questioning, he cracked. "Did Damien Cross order you to kill Matteo Rodriguez?" Sarah asked, her voice quiet but deadly. Thorne's shoulders slumped. He wouldn't look at Cross. He said the kid was a loose end, that he was going to ruin everything. He gave me the key, told me to make it look like the friend did it, that the frame was already set up. And the knife? I wiped my prints. Put his back on it. He gestured vaguely in my direction. The courtroom erupted. The gavel banged. But the truth was out, raw and undeniable, hanging in the air like smoke. The jury was out for less than 4 hours. When they filed back in, their faces were grim, resolved. I couldn't breathe. I felt Elena's gaze burning into me, a lifeline. On the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant, Leonardo Vance. Not guilty. The word not guilty didn't feel like a victory cheer. It felt like a long, slow exhalation after holding your breath for 12 years. It was a release of pressure so immense I thought I might dissolve. There were shouts, tears from the gallery. Elena was crying, smiling. I looked over at Cross. The mask was gone, replaced by a look of pure, venomous hatred. He was being handcuffed, read his rights. The predator was finally in the cage. The judge slammed his gavel again, declaring me a free man. My record expunged. It was over. The ghost had won. But as I stood there, surrounded by the chaos of my own vindication, I felt a profound emptiness. The rage that had fueled me for over a decade had nowhere to go. The fight was over, and I was left alone with the silence, with the ghost of my friend, and with the terrifying, wide-open question. What now? Freedom, true freedom, is a quiet, terrifying thing. There's no enemy to fight, no wall to scale. There's just you, and the silence. The first few months after the trial were a blur of interviews, a fleeting media circus, and then a crushing, deafening quiet. The world moved on. The hashtags faded. I was left with a small state-issued compensation check and a life I didn't know how to live. I rented a studio apartment. It was a box, but one I could leave. The first night I slept on the floor because the bed was too soft, the silence too absolute. I'd wake up in a panic, my heart jackhammering, reaching for a button to call for the guard, only to find a light switch. The ghosts of prison routine were etched deep. I tried to reconnect with my family. My mother's eyes held a love so scarred by grief and shame, it was almost unrecognizable. We sat at her kitchen table, the same one I'd eaten at as a boy, and the chasm of 12 years felt wider than any prison yard. We didn't know what to say. The words, "I'm sorry," and "I love you," felt like stones too heavy to lift. The visit was short. The goodbye was a relief. Another kind of heartbreak. The rage against Cross was gone, but it had left a void. What do you do when the fire that kept you warm goes out? You get cold. I was adrift in a past I couldn't reclaim, and a future I couldn't imagine. Arthur, my old mentor, found me. He'd been released a year before me and was living in a small town, tending a garden. We met in a park. He looked older, softer. "The fight's over, Leo," he said, sipping his coffee. "Now comes the hard part. The living." "How?" The word was a plea. "You find a reason, not a big one, a small one, and you build on that." His words rattled around in my head. A small reason. I walked the streets, a ghost among the living, watching people with their purposes, jobs, errands, families. I had none. Until I passed a community center. Through a window, I saw a group of teenagers, their postures defensive, their eyes hard. Kids from the system, kids on the edge. I saw myself. I saw Mateo. I walked in and asked if they needed any help. A week later, I was running an informal art workshop. Just once a week. It was my small reason. It wasn't easy. The kids were skeptical, tough. They knew my story. Some saw me as a hero. Others saw me as a cautionary tale. I didn't give them lectures. I gave them charcoal and paper. I told them to draw the noise in their heads. And slowly, something began to happen. As I watched them translate their anger and fear into something tangible, something outside of themselves, I felt a flicker. A tiny, fragile ember of purpose. I wasn't just Leo, the exonerated inmate. I was Leo who could show them that the pain didn't have to be the end of the story. We were rebuilding, all of us, together. Brick by painful brick. I started painting again. My own work, not Mateo's. It was clumsy, rusty. But it was mine. The studio began to feel less like a waiting room and more like a home. I was learning to breathe again, each breath a conscious, deliberate act. But Matteo's last letter, the one I had carried out of prison, remained on my small desk, sealed. It was the final ghost, the last piece of him. I'd touch the envelope, feel its texture, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. I was afraid it would break the fragile piece I was building. I was afraid the ghost of his last words would be louder than the quiet life I was trying to create. I was learning to live, but I was still too scared to hear his final goodbye. A year to the day after my exoneration, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. The ghost had to be laid to rest. I took the letter to the park where Arthur and I had met, to a quiet bench under an old oak tree. My hands trembled as I slid my finger under the flap, the paper tearing with a sound like a sigh held for 13 years. I unfolded the single sheet. Matteo's familiar, looping handwriting filled the page. I took a deep breath and began to read. Leo, if you're reading this, then the worst has happened. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I've gotten us into something. Something bad. Cross isn't just a collector. He's a forger on a massive scale. He forced me to work for him. That commission I told you about? It was a fake. I authenticated a forgery. But it gets worse. When we were desperate, back when my dad was sick, I went to him for a loan. He said he needed a co-signer. I was scared you'd say no, that you'd think it was a mistake. So I used your name. I forged your signature on the paperwork. I'm so sorry, brother. I was desperate and stupid. Now he owns me. He says if I don't keep working for him, he'll expose the loan fraud and send you to prison instead of me. He has the document. He framed you for this before he even decided to kill me. I painted you into this trap with my own cowardice. I can't live with this. I'm going to tell the truth tomorrow. I'm going to the authorities with everything. I know what he'll do. He'll kill me, and he'll make sure you take the fall for it. It's the perfect way to silence us both. This is my confession. My fault. All of it. Forgive me. Please. Live for both of us. Make something beautiful. Always your brother, Matteo. I sat there, the paper fluttering in my breeze, the world tilting on its axis. The air left my lungs in a rush. It wasn't a letter of farewell. It was a suicide note, a confession. He hadn't just been killed for knowing too much. He had walked to his death, knowing it was coming, to try and free us both. And the frame, the meticulous, perfect frame. It wasn't just built on a lie, it was built on my name, on a signature he had forged in a moment of weakness. The man I had spent 12 years avenging was the one who had, however unintentionally, handed Cross the very brush to paint me into the nightmare. The rage didn't come. The betrayal didn't come. Instead, a wave of the most profound, heartbreaking understanding washed over me. He was just a scared kid, too. We both were. We were both victims of a monster, but we were also victims of our own desperate choices, our love for each other getting twisted into the very weapon used to destroy us. I looked up at the sky, the leaves of the oak tree dappling the sunlight. The ghost wasn't in the letter. The ghost was the anger I'd been carrying. And in that moment, I let it go. I forgave him. I finally, truly forgave him. The twist wasn't in the crime. It was in the redemption. My second chance wasn't about proving my innocence to the world. It was about finding the grace to forgive my best friend for his part in my hell. And in doing so, I finally set us both free.